Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Tour in 2025. This is the first event, and I'm currently on site here in Germany. It is a 10-player tournament, which leads to an 8-player knockout. And today we will say goodbye to 4 people from the incoming semifinal and final matches. Magnus Carlsen leads Nojibek Abdusattorov 1-0. Vincent Keymer leads Alireza Firouzja 1-0. Fabiano Caruana leads Gukesh 1-0. And Hikaru, Nakamura, and Javahir Sindarov are all tied up. And the battle for 9th place, Aronian is leading Vladimir Fedoseev. Now, of course, they are fighting for 9th and not for a championship, but they're also fighting for $5,000 as well as points for the overall standings. So, not an insignificant game. And I'm going to get into the action right away, okay? So we're going to kick things off in this matchup between Magnus Carlsen and Nojibek Abdusattorov, and everybody with the white pieces from this starting position opted to move this knight to b3, fighting for some space, and also in the future opting to build up the center like this, which makes a lot of sense. White could have started as well by playing the move f4, targeting over here, but decided not to do that. Black plays f6, and in this game, this is what Nojibek chose. You're going to see some other games where white played d4 pretty quickly. Nojibek did something completely unique and played the move c4. It's a very committal decision. It's a committal decision because he isn't making a pawn break, and he's actually making the position a little bit Swiss cheese-like, right? With pieces able to kind of jump on all these complexes. And now Magnus actually has to be a little bit accurate with the setup that he chooses. Now in the game, Magnus played knight b6. And here Nojibek did something very surprising. I mean, I thought for like, without a doubt, he was going to play knight e3, defending this pawn, and trying to put the knight on d5. That makes a lot of sense. But he went for d3, which is not really a move that I understood, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I thought it was very natural for him to play this. I'm not saying that, like, I would have played it, given... Well, actually, I would have played it given the circumstance. And it just so happens to be a better move. I just didn't understand the intricacies of playing the move d3. Maybe Nojibek didn't like something, but he ends up going d3, baits Magnus into playing knight a4, which is actually the best move. Very fascinating here. I mean, just basically fighting for the dark square complex, and then as soon as the knight goes there and takes its eye off the center, he goes d4. So that was his idea. His idea was not to block his dark squared bishop, and to strike the center twice, and do this. And I guess now he's going to finish up the development of all of his pieces, get like a pretty nice position, and just have, you know, be happy. Magnus now puts his queen into the center of the board. Okay, he attacks the knight on d4. White now has to make a decision. Nojibek drops out of the center, because taking on c6 would have probably helped black consolidate or open up the rook. And now we have just a very deep move here from Magnus. We have the move a5, which is, yeah, that's high-level stuff. You know, if Magnus had played something else, White's next move was going to probably be something like b3, and then maybe even in the future, more moves like on this side, like maybe even b4 and b5. Like this is not a completely outlandish plan because this knight doesn't have very many forward moves. So Magnus plays this move, which is quite high level, and he wants to fight for the dark squares in the center of the board, and he wants to be able to stop White from ever playing b4 himself. Now Nojibek plays queen d2, and I just feel like Nojibek didn't have quite a good feel of the positions early because Magnus immediately punishes him. He already moved that f-pawn once, but basically the second that White takes his eye off the center, Magnus attacks it, and now Nojibek plays f4, which is a huge commitment. It's a pawn sacrifice. He just straight up loses a pawn, but in losing this pawn, he's now arguing, well, I'm going to get a lot of my pieces developed with bishop d3, queen e6, and knight e3. Apparently knight e3 is a mistake. I mean... To me, this is a very, you know, simple solution here. You just play the pawn to g6. But Magnus didn't go for that. Maybe he didn't like that Nojibek was going to quickly rotate his king. We taught, you know, I mentioned how, you know, this is obviously freestyle, so you can castle on both sides of the board, and in that case, you know, maybe White would put the rooks here and then start some sort of attack. Evidently, Magnus didn't like something because he went here, and he was being quite tentative, down 16 minutes on the clock, despite, you know, just looking at the position, you think... Well, White is, you know, not really posing any particular dangers to Black. Black is looking kind of okay. Nojibek went bishop f2, which was such a severe mistake according to the game review that it was given a double question mark, despite just simply developing a bishop. It really wanted him to castle, and that rook would have basically just hopped over. But, you know, bishop f2, bishop e6 is ultimately what's chosen, and Magnus ends up with a clean pawn. Keep in mind, Nodjibek has to win this game. It's not even about drawing this game. Like, he's worse. But he doesn't even have to draw it. He has to win it. So bishop g3, and both guys do end up hopping their kings and rooks like this. The rook just comes over. And now here the computer really liked this move queen g8, just sort of leaving completely and then launching a pawn counter attack and trying to bring the rook into the game. That's what the computer here is saying is minus 1.5. Magnus chooses something much more prudent, which is just trading the pieces into an endgame where he's going to be up a pawn, and I really don't think Nodjibek is going to win. Nodjibek here could have kept the queens on the board just out of a matter of like, if I trade the queens now, I doubt I beat Magnus down a pawn. But, you know, he keeps kind of playing the moves that he thinks are good. Magnus here chops everything down and just ends up in a position where he has 2 rooks, a bishop, and 5 pawns versus 2 rooks, a knight, and 4. And now it is really just a matter of technique. You bring out the bishop, you try offering trades, you go into a rook endgame, and you simply do this. And Nodjibek is absolutely never, ever, 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 ever going to win this position. And he's, you know, absolutely likely never, ever, ever going to draw it. Maybe against me, but not against Magnus, because white is simply a pawn down. Black plays actively now, trades into this endgame with a 2-on-3, advances the pawns, and Nodjibek's pawn is fast, but it's stopped. And yeah, black's position is simply too powerful here. Black is just advancing. He will advance with all his pawns. Rook g7, rook check, king takes is a very nice touch. And here Nodjibek resigned. He resigned because this check is coming, and like, let's say something like this. I'm going to play check, bring this out, b4. You know, white's going to try to do something like this, and this is winning quite easily because here what you do is you can actually bring your rook to the back. You can give a check, but you can also play king a2. And this is a very nice concept, right? Check, king b2, here b3, and so on, and you win. You can also start with king a3, and then king c2, you have to give this check. And here you have to be a little careful. You cannot just quickly push your pawn. You have to redo this, but you maybe actually no. The only approach would be to put the rook on b1, but that is the way you win. And Magnus wins quite a nice game and moves on to the semifinal. And the next recap that I have for you is from an absolutely ridiculous match between Jawakhir Sindarov and Hikaru Nakamura. Yesterday, Hikaru on the verge, it felt like he had a 2-pawn advantage in the endgame, but it was just 1 pawn. And he wasn't able to convert it down the stretch. Oh, stretching my back. And today, he also started with knight to b3, just like Nodjibek. And this one was a little bit different. Here, Sindarov moved his knight out to c6 quite quickly. And Hikaru played d4. He played it very fast and takes. And Sindarov now thought for 17 minutes. So you're going to see the Fabi game, Fabiano versus Gukesh, was very similar. In that game, Gukesh went for f5. In the previous game also, Magnus played f6. He played f6 very early. He was actually quite smart about developing both of his bishops before his knights, which is very interesting in this format. Sindarov, as early as the 5th move in this game, was down 40. He was down half the time. He spent 45 minutes on his first 5 moves, which was unbelievable. Like, I had no idea what he was thinking about. Hikaru went queen d2. He counter-spent 17 minutes. Of course, he could have played queen d2, queen c3, queen g3. He went for queen d2. Now Sindarov played f6. Knight c3, he put his queen on a5, and Hikaru just sort of like pushed his pawn, protected his queen side a little bit, and didn't let Sindarov enter. We had a trade. We had the bishop going to d6. Hikaru made an improvement, and then dropped the queen to b4 to make this trade, and this was the position that we had to work with. So basically here, only white can be better. White is better because of the bishop pair, which is, traditional wisdom tells you that white has an advantage. And also, white's got a pretty powerful rook. But overall, the position is kind of balanced, right? Like, I mean, black has not done anything completely wrong. Both guys have moved their rooks, which means they're either going to castle that way or they're not going to castle at all. But Sindarov, at the end of the day, has 7 minutes to 37. I mean, I don't know what is with this dude. I don't know if he just loves adrenaline. I don't know what it is. He loves having no time on the clock, and he loves giving a heart attack to the fans from Uzbekistan. F4, now a very well-timed move. Bishop C4, the only move in the position not to be worse. The knight drops back to F7, and Hikaru playing rook B1, and a nice move here from Sindarov, very well-timed. The A-pawn trying to sneak past the position. Hikaru plays B6, trying to restrict the black position as well, and then bishop D4 and rook D1, and it seems like all the pieces have arrived to the party, and this is what we have to work with. Sindarov is playing this game with 3 minutes and 52 seconds on the clock. Okay? E5. Advancing, rook takes B7 is the threat. Crazy. Sindarov closes the position, but Hikaru captures and damages the pawns. And now plays bishop F3, making sure nothing can infiltrate. Sindarov using the only thing he has, which is the A-pawn. Hikaru going to play defense now. Sindarov advances with the F-pawn. King comes forward. Knight D6, bishop E5, and it's very tense. But suddenly it's a rook and bishop endgame. And this one doesn't look particularly winnable, but the one important thing here for Hikaru is that Sindarov has a minute. So maybe he will blunder something, but Sindarov just so sharp. I mean, he's giving up pawns and creating counterplay. He's giving up pawns, but he's still creating counterplay. Like, he's a pawn down, but it's not so simple. How do you win this position? He keeps activity with 1 minute on the clock. He has played like 10, 15 moves in a row. He's going to be down 2 pawns pretty soon. Watch this. He's going to end up playing D3 for a moment, down 2 pawns, but now it is Hikaru who is down on time. We just went from 37 to 7 to like 3 to 20 to Sindarov having more time than Hikaru, which is, I don't even know how that's possible. And ultimately, this ends up in a position where, you know, Hikaru is going to try to advance his pawn, but it's actually not possible. Because black always has enough counterplay here, and it looks like maybe white can get a rook and bishop versus rook by giving away the pawn for the bishop, but it's just not going to happen. And ultimately, this game, after nearly 80 moves, in fact, no, 79, ends in a draw. Which is crazy. Which is absolutely wild. So 2 games now these dudes have had that have been so close. And the score is now 1-1. So, it's playoffs time. It's tiebreak time. They play classical, but now tiebreak is 10-minute and 10-second bonus. So completely different. We're going back to the original round-robin format. We have to break a tie. So, we sit down. Totally different game. Okay, we have some bishops in the corners, maybe again, a little bit of F3 and E4, right? We just looked at these bishops actually in the classical format. Right? If you take a look at the position, it was actually 2 bishops again. So 2 bishops and 2 bishops. And actually the queen and the knight. Right, that's quite a coincidence. So this was their classical game. This is their rapid game. So F4 knight C6. E4 E5. And it is Hikaru, it's actually Sindarov completely misevaluating, but I want to draw your attention to something else. He spent 2 minutes on the first move. Not only did he do that, he proceeded to be down nearly 3.5 minutes by move 4, and he was giving up his dark squared bishop, and Hikaru got a super pleasant position from the opening. So Sindarov, after, you know, clutching it out in the classical portion, just totally like misunderstanding the position in the early stages of this rapid, and it is just Hikaru who has a great time. A4, queen F1, and it is, look at this position. Sindarov has 2 bishops versus 2 knights, and Hikaru's just going to start walking the pawns. What is Java doing? What is going on here? King b2, a nice move. It seems like every move that is made for the first 15 moves here, the advantage for white is getting bigger. But then Sindarov is like, well, how are you going to beat me? You're going to beat me, right? I'm not just going to go down without a fight. I'm going to play defense. Hikaru now has to methodically and slowly march his pieces forward, and he doesn't. Here, he needed to play queen b5, b4, and a5. That was the approach. He needed to get in there with the knights, b4, push the knight back, play a5. But instead of that, he goes here, and Sindarov catches him. He catches him with c5, and suddenly, this trade is just better for black, and Sindarov completely takes over. Oh my goodness, the advantage was as high as +4 here. queen b5, b6, b4, knight b7, a5, all of these different ideas. But instead we have bishop d4, and what happens is Sindarov completely neutralizes the attack and swarms and wins the game. I mean, he just wins everything. Queen c5, dust settles, and Hikaru goes down. Java here was losing in the first game of their classical segment. It was like +5 in the endgame. He was never losing in the second game, but nothing, particularly special. And now here he is. He was in a much worse position. But the second that Hikaru gave him a chance, he roared back into the game, and Hikaru had to be careful here. But all of a sudden, Black consolidated and was winning the game. Unbelievable. What a resolve from Sindarov, like just incredible fighting spirit, which means that now Hikaru has to win with the black pieces. And this was one of the funniest games I have ever seen. Watch. First, the computer thought a mistake was made on move 1, which is pretty nutty. Move 1. Then it thought a mistake was made on move 2. Then it thought both guys made mistakes on move 3. Like, literal guess the elo. But obviously they're playing rapid. They can't tell the exact setup, right? b5, opening up the bishop, Hikaru gambiting a pawn, creating threats. The knight goes to b6, which is apparently also a mistake. Now white makes a mistake. Now white makes another mistake. Now white makes another mistake. But now Hikaru makes a mistake. Like, this is a red and orange circus. But after castling, right, and Sindarov playing, yeah, you're actually looking at that, right? Instead of playing castles, because he wanted to maintain the rook on this file, he plays king f1, which is also apparently a mistake. It was better for him, allegedly, to play the move e3, but nobody is understanding this position. I mean, this position is just random. It's like playing spin the bottle or, I don't know, something else. But now Java here plays this move knight f5, sacrificing his knight. Now Hikaru has to block the check with a knight. Sindarov taking it and playing d4. I mean, I don't think, does Sindarov know that he won the previous game? Like, he doesn't have to win this game. He just has to not lose. But he's playing like he has to win. He plays the move d4, just total, like, it's half a bluff, half playing this incredible move knight to e6. Remember, Hikaru has to win the game, so what does Hikaru do here? He sacrifices his rook. Just take it. So we have this, queen h6, and now this move bishop f4. So the queen has to drop back. And now king g7. And it's Hikaru who's going for counterplay. Sindarov plays this move b3. Hikaru walls in the dark squared bishop, just doesn't allow it to have any life. And now a mistake, and the bishop has been completely sealed in. Suddenly Hikaru is winning. This is insane. And Sindarov has 30 seconds on the clock. We are looking like we are going to a blitz playoff. I told you this was a ridiculous match. Sindarov has to go here. Now the pieces trade, c1, and it is simply Hikaru who is up a knight. Now, Sindarov has 2 pawns. The game is not over. Rook d6 check is a very tricky little move. King goes to f8. Rook c6. a4. Hikaru grabs a pawn. Now, Sindarov only has 1 pawn for a knight. However, he does have activity. Hikaru puts his knight in the center. Bishop to d4. The only chance that Sindarov has is Hikaru blundering some sort of pawn advancement. Like, if he loses the pawn on a7 or something like that, then maybe, he will get tricked. And he makes a mistake. Rook b8 was apparently wrong. He apparently needed to either bring his bishop or start bringing his king. He goes here. Sindarov plays takes, a6. Now it's very tricky. Now it's not easy at all. Because moves like, rook a5, there's traps all over the place. There's like checks, and then there's checks, and then there's things like a7. I mean, you got to be really, really, really careful with the way you do this. There's also moves like e4, and there's no easy, space to put the knight. He plays rook a5, and now we have bishop d4, setting up this checkmate threat. Hikaru plays e5, and the crazy thing about the move e5, there is king e8, king d7. e5 is apparently just a mistake because there's check here, a7. Java here not only saves this game in the time trouble, he's winning. He's winning the game. Hikaru goes down to 2 seconds on the clock, makes a move, and he's just losing because it's rook c8, it's a8, and it's over. Now, here's something strange is happening. The relay was showing originally, I refreshed it. Originally, it was showing a draw. But yeah, Hikaru resigned. He played e4 and resigned because rook c8, you promote, and just a few moves ago, he was just straight up a knight. and then Sindarov, you know, walks in with this counterattack, and you had to be really, really careful. It was actually much more dangerous than it looked. Javakhir Sindarov saved 3 borderline losing positions in this match. Usually Hikaru is doing this in reverse. He would do this to Sindarov, but in a crazy turn of events, he is knocked out, and Sindarov is one of the other semifinalists. Just absolutely wild stuff. And I've got more games for you from the knockouts. This is Fabiano Caruana versus Gukesh. This one started very similar, but with a very key difference. d4 was played much faster in this game, and you may remember that Sindarov in their classical game against Hikaru went queen e5. It is actually Gukesh in this game playing f5 and gambiting a pawn for a pawn like this, but clearly misunderstanding the dynamics of the opening, and actually, as early as move 10, a pawn down. Just basically a clean pawn down. Now, instead of the move g6, he could have played takes here, here, and then in this position, black would have had to make a move, and he could have played a6, for example, but the way that Gukesh did it in the game is that he went for this, and Fabiano was just the pawn up. He was just the pawn up, and maybe black was able to get counterplay with slightly more accurate play, but the whole recap of this game is going to literally take me 2 minutes. Because on the 18th move, Gukesh resigned. Like, before the game even managed to get anywhere. But the crazy thing is, that was it. He just misplayed in the early stages of the game, and the game was over before he could ever get settled. Already he's down a pawn, he's worse structurally, white obviously has an attack incoming, and on top of all of that, Gukesh doesn't have to save this game, he has to win. So he just resigns. It's kind of nuts. Like, this move g6 ultimately led to white having this little tactic, and Gukesh is just down a pawn, which is kind of crazy. I guess f5 ultimately was a mistake. Maybe he did need to go for queen e5. At first, the computer actually quite likes f5, but maybe it was Sindarov's choice, queen e5, which ultimately was the right decision, but okay. We will never know. And a shocking second game, Fabiano Caruana 2-0, and Gukesh eliminated as well, along with Nojibek and along with Hikaru. They probably will play for some other places. For the matchup of the 9th place game, I'm going to go through this one quite fast. Fedoseev had to win this game. This game was bananas. These, by the way, queen e5, same thing, just like in the Sindarov game. Very similar. Queen a5. This one was knight b3, and this one was wild as Levon sacrificed his bishop. Levon sacrificed his bishop to put on an absolutely dazzling, I mean, this is the Levon that we want to see. Tripled b-pawns, trying to defend the white king. D takes e4, rook takes d1, and Levon just has all of his pieces playing versus a wall of tripled b-pawns and a first row. This is ridiculous stuff out here. And remember, Levon doesn't even have to win this game. And he ultimately roars in here with the pawn, the knight, the bishop, all of his pieces. This is, I mean, what is even happening? This doesn't even look real. You've got e2, you have rook d3, knight d3, knight e2, knight d2. Every single piece can go to every single square. Fedoseev now is actually losing here. And Levon here has to play rook into d3 and take this pawn. Ultimately, he settles for knight c4 back because, again, he's okay with a draw. And Fedoseev doesn't repeat the position because the draw is not good for him. So queen takes a4, queen a2 check, and when it's all said and done, Levon ends up getting the bishop back and simply up a pawn. So rook e1, rook e8, and Fedoseev knows that, you know, a draw is not good enough, but he will settle for a draw. Levon trades down, and this is a drawn king and pawn endgame, and Levon does take the 9th place, but I mean, that was, you talk about a position that doesn't even look real. I mean, yeah, take me through this position, huh? Look at this. First row of pieces for white, tripled b-pawns, and black is down a bishop. Nuts. You got to give credit where it's due. And now here, this is the matchup, the final matchup of the day. Vincent Keymer won yesterday in the first game, and he had to now be defeated. You know, Firouzja had to beat him, and from the opening, it was a big miss because, you know, Keymer didn't play for, he didn't go for a d4. He kind of played it a little bit slowly, and Firouzja tried to provoke him. He tried to get him to play a3 and maybe take, or maybe even go back and create a weakness, but Keymer here misses that Firouzja can just start going for knight a4 and b5. And all of a sudden, white's position is quite dangerous. And let me tell you something right now. Firouzja is a very creative player, and he flies his king across the board and just has a monster attack building up. Right? Bishop to e2, c5 and c4, and this is Firouzja right here. Firouzja unleashed. I mean, you got to put him away with the white pieces, and it's not going particularly well. He has an absolutely monstrous attack building. Absolutely monstrous. Rook F, knight d2. Now he has to play maybe rook f c8. He's got knight b4, knight b2 sacrifices. And ultimately, b4, knight b1 is a miss from Vincent. And here Firouzja has to find the right continuation. The right continuation here was the very obscure d6, stabilizing the center before committing anything else with queen a3. But he runs in with queen a3, and the king goes running. Firouzja thought, well, this is easy. I just keep this open. But the king runs away. The king abandons where he was castled, runs back to e1, and suddenly, not only is Vincent Keymer not any worse, Vincent Keymer might be better. Firouzja is not going to be able to win this game. He had a lot of pressure. He needed to be slightly more accurate in the attack. He ends up burning all the bridges and going all in, but he has to win, and it's just not good enough. And Vincent, very classy here. He knows that a draw is good. So what does he do? He just repeats the position, makes a draw, and he knocks out Alireza Firouzja. Vincent showing tremendous defensive prowess, tremendous nerves as well, and a crazy day here in the knockout portion. We can take a look at the results. It is now Vincent Keymer versus Magnus Carlsen, and Fabiano Caruana playing Javahir Sindarov, which is pretty epic stuff. This is the knockout stage. There is a playoff for 5th to 8th place. I guess it has not populated into the standings, but obviously 5th to 8th place will be Alireza. You talk about a monster group of 4. Nodirbek Abdusattorov, Gukesh, Hikaru, and Firouzja. Crazy. Firouzja, by the way, picked Vincent Keymer and then was knocked out by him. Javahir Sindarov getting it done versus Hikaru, Magnus, and Nodirbek. They were just paired against each other, and Fabiano, very convincing win. So that's your those are your scores, those are your matchups, and we will play some more tomorrow. For now, though, you know what the drill is. Check out Chessly if you'd like to gain some elo. Check out some of my courses, and tickets for the Europe tour are going. See you tomorrow for the semifinals. 1 p.m. Eastern, I will be live here on the broadcast, and get out of here.